Storytime. I wonder how long it took. I 15 male have a pretty huge deep dark secret. When I was 13 I had this group of friends, and we always hung out in graveyards. One night while we are just messing around, we noticed there's a crypt that's partially open. It's definitely big enough for something to get in or get out. Naturally we think this is an invitation to bet one of our friends won't go inside, and count to 100. We all decide it should be our friend, Andy, that goes in, and eventually he does it. At first everything is fine, but after Andy is in the crypt for about 10 seconds, something happens that will haunt me for the rest of my life. One of the other guys in the group thinks it will be funny to close the crypt. Andy is just gone. We can't see him or hear him anymore, and we panic. We all stand there and decide to never tell anyone what happened. The entire time the town searched for Andy, I always knew where he was, and when they were calling his name, I already knew he couldn't hear them. Till this day, Andy still has never been found. Every time I pass a cemetery, I wonder how long it took him to stop screaming.
Story time. I could feel them moving. If you get grossed out easily, I would stop reading here. The worst thing that ever happened to me is actually pretty disgusting. Even though I have no one to blame but myself, I admit that I don't have the best hygiene. I don't shower every day, and I probably only brushed my teeth once a month. I didn't really think this was a problem, but not brushing my teeth almost killed my. This one day I wake up in the middle of the night because I'm in so much pain. I have this huge cavity, so I thought something about it was just bugging me. I looked at it and I didn't see anything, so I took some medicine and ignored it. The next day, I noticed that my sinuses feel really weird, almost like they're full, and there's lots of pressure. When I blew my nose, this really thick green and black stuff comes pouring out of my nose, and that's the very first time I feel it. Something was moving around in there. The more I focused on the moving, the more it seemed like it was all in my head, so I ignored it. Weeks go by, and I can't chew anything on top of it smelling awful every time I inhaled. Eventually, I was in so much pain I couldn't ignore it anymore. I finally go to the emergency room, and a part of me still can't believe what they found. I had larvae living in my face, but not just my face, and my mouth too. I had never noticed worms in the tissue when I blew my nose, but the stuff that came out was so thick I probably just missed them. The doctors thought the worms got in through my cavity and ate their way up. I expected that was the worst of it, but then they explained the infestation was also in my brain. They weren't able to remove the worms, but did kill them. Now I brush my teeth every day, and I just have to live with knowing there are worms in my brain. Sometimes I still think I can feel them moving. Storytime. I think it's still in here. I 16 female went through something about a month ago that still scares the shite out of me. One night I was up late because I didn't finish my homework, and it started raining. I love thunderstorms, so I wanted to watch the lightning. The best place to do that is in my living room, because there's a ton of windows, and there's also this fireplace. The fireplace is really old, and we never use it, but it's open, and there's nothing covering the giant space. I was sitting there watching the lightning when I started to hear this noise coming from the fireplace. At first I ignored it, but I kept hearing it, and then I realized it would stop as soon as I started paying attention to it. I still just figured it was the rain, until I realized it sounded like the noise was getting closer and closer. I thought it might be an animal, and that's when I heard another sound, but this time it was a voice. I couldn't make out what it was saying, but I knew someone was trying to break in. I was going to wake my dad up when I saw two glowing red dots, not side by side like you'd expect, but one on top of the other. I stood there too afraid to move, and I noticed I could hear breathing that wasn't mine. Just as fast as the two dots appeared, they disappear, and I ran. I wasn't sure what I saw, so I didn't want to wake my parents up. Now I wish I had. I have no idea what crawled down the fireplace, and I think it's still in here. Storytime. Better her than me. My mom and I love to go to antique shops and estate sales. This one day I'm at an estate sale, and I see this really gorgeous hand mirror. I needed one for my vanity area anyway, so I bought it. When I showed it to my mom, she asked me why I would buy a broken mirror. I was really confused because the mirror looked fine to me just a second ago, but when I turned it around to look again, it wasn't fine. The entire glass part that shows your reflection was missing. I thought maybe I was wrong and tried not to think about it, but I was positive the glass was there before. As soon as I got home, I took the mirror out and it was fine. As I was looking at the mirror, my mom called to me from the other room, and when I looked up in that direction I froze. Out of the corner of my eye I could see that my reflection wasn't looking off to the right like it should have been. It was looking straight up directly at me, and then it started grinning. I was too afraid to look back down, so I just put the mirror face down on my desk and left my room. That night while I was in bed, I could hear whispering, but it didn't sound like one or two people. It sounded sounded like 20. I was super scared, but I got up and looked at the mirror. It was my reflection, but it wasn't. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something was off. I tried moving my head, but my reflection didn't budge. It just stared back at me. And then that awful grin started to spread across the mirror. I dropped the mirror, ran, and slept in the living room. The next day my friend came over after school. She picked up the mirror, looked at it, and fixed her hair. I asked her if she liked it so fast. She started looking at me weird. When she said yes, I told her she could have it. It's been a month since she took the mirror, and both of her parents have died. She's been in a lot of trouble, and honestly, she looks kind of sick. Part of me feels guiltily because it all might be my fault, but hey, better her than me. Storytime: what really happened to them. My grandfather had always been a talkative man, but there was one story he would only tell when pressed. He was a young search and rescue volunteer in Russia back in the late 1950s, and he had been a part of the team sent to investigate the Dyatlov Pass incident. As he and the other rescuers reached the grisly scene, they found the hikers' campsite in chaos. The tents were slashed from the inside. The bodies were frozen, contorted, and scattered in the snow. Some of them were dressed only in their undergarments despite the freezing temperatures, and their skin was a weird shade of orange. Some even had horrific injuries like broken bones and internal trauma, but there was no sign of anything being wrong on the surface. This sent shivers down the spine of every rescuer. But what my grandfather never shared publicly was what he saw when they ventured further into the mountains. Deep in the snowy wilderness, they discovered 3 of the hikers huddled together, their faces etched with terror. They were alive, but barely. One of them uttered words my grandfather could never forget. He said, "They watched us from the trees," and his eyes darted towards the forest, but there was nothing there. The survivor's eyes held an eerie emptiness, and he refused to speak further about what had happened that night. My grandfather was haunted by the encounter, and would only say that the mountains held secrets, and some horrors were better left hidden. To this day, I can't help but wonder what truly lurked in those woods during the Dyatlov Pass incident, and what my grandfather witnessed that he never dared to reveal. Storytime: don't ever let them in. A few years ago, I had an experience that still haunts me, and it was a night I will never forget. It was a cold evening when I heard a soft knocking on my front door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I approached with caution. Through the peephole, I saw 2 children, probably around 10 or 11 years old, standing on my porch. Their appearances were unsettling from the start. They wore outdated clothing, like something from another era, and their eyes were the stuff of nightmares. Their irises were completely black, void of any discernible white or color. My heart raced, but something compelled me to open the door. The taller child, a boy, spoke in a monotone voice, asking to come inside and use my phone. He claimed they were lost and needed to call their parents. My instincts screamed danger, and I should have refused, but the fear in their eyes made me hesitate. That's when I noticed something even more horrifying. The boy and his companion were starting to merge into one boy. They stared down at the ground, as if they were concealing their unsettling gaze. I stammered out a lie about not having a phone, and as I began to close the door, a sense of overwhelming dread washed over me. The children grew insistent, pleading for entry, their voices growing more desperate, their eyes never leaving the ground. I finally mustered the courage to slam the door shut, and a wave of relief washed over me. But the feeling of unease lingered. I checked through the window, and the children were gone, vanished into the darkness without a trace. Since that night, I've heard stories of similar encounters with the black-eyed children. I don't know what they wanted, but if they ever knock on your door, don't ever let them in.